Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our session today, which is So You Want to Get Into Publishing, Talking Roles. And I'm the chair for the session. I'm Dr. Gill Tasker, and I teach in publishing studies at the University of Stirling. Now, I won't wait too long before I introduce our excellent panel for today, but I just want to tell you first a little bit about the wider initiative that this session is part of. So a very warm welcome too to the Scottish Books Long Weekend. This is a very special online series of events to celebrate Scotland's books, authors and publishers. And it's brought to you by Publishing Scotland and Books from Scotland with support from Creative Scotland. So there's various events over this weekend, and they'll be bringing you lots of discussion around fiction, non-fiction, children's and YA young adult books. And if you've not done so already, please do, after the event today, go to booksfromscotland.com and check out all the other events that are on offer. There's sure to be something else there for your interest too. And also we do have an online bookshop, which is the Scottish Books Long Weekend, and that's at bookshop.org. And that's a really nice initiative that supports independent bookshops throughout the UK. And there you can browse the shelves for books written by the weekend participants, and also 10% of the book sales made through this site for this weekend will support Publishing Scotland's stellar work in promoting Scotland's publishing sector. Now, if you're so inclined, and we'd love it if you were, we would really like you to shout about the festival, but also today's event on social media. So if you're there, please do include us. The hashtag is @ScottishBooks on Twitter. There's also @BooksFromScotland on Instagram, and there's hashtags ScotBooks and also ScotBooks Long Weekend. So hopefully you caught all of that there. And in terms of format, to let you know how it will run, I'll be asking our panel questions for maybe around 40 minutes or so, and then I'll open up to an audience Q&A. So do put your thinking caps on. I'm sure our panel are happy to answer any questions that you have. In terms of you asking these questions, you can type into the chat box as we go through, but I won't actually, turn to them until a bit later in the session. But we do really hope that you'll be forthcoming with some questions for the panel. So without further ado then, I'm really delighted to welcome our panel today. So we have Kirstin Lamb. If you could give us a little wave, Kirstin. So Kirstin is Senior PR and Rights Manager at Barrington Stoke. We're also joined by Leah McDowell. And Leah is Art and Production Director at Floris Books. And we have Kay Farrell. And Kay is from Sandstone Press, and she is assistant publisher there. And last but not least, we've got Ceris Jones, who's campaigns manager also at Sandstone Press. Okay, so my first question to the panel then is, how did you actually become aware that working in the publishing industry was a possible career option? And if I could start with Kirstin, please.
Thanks very much, Jill. Hi everyone, I'm Kirstin. As Jill mentioned, I'm the Senior PR and Rights Manager at Barrington Stoke. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to be focusing mostly on all my rights work. And I guess in terms of how I became aware of working in publishing, to be honest, it was a little bit of luck. I was at a point where I was not sure that I wanted to go into the big bag world of employment, and I kind of just printed out a list of all of the postgraduate courses that were available in my local area, and one of them happened to be publishing. And I'm very lucky that that kind of all worked out really nicely for me, and I did enjoy it as a course and later as a career. So it was really a kind of a fluke, to be honest. It's something I kind of always been generically kind of aware of in the background, but I didn't go into it with kind of much knowledge as well. So that's kind of just to show everyone that you don't need to have screeds and screeds of experience before you kind of embark on this journey.
Thank you very much. And yes, same for me with my own kind of finding out about the industry too. Great. Okay, so Ceris, what about you, please?
So like you said, I'm the campaigns manager at Sandstone. I handle marketing and PR. So I basically let people know that our books exist. How did I become aware of publishing as an industry? I was about 2 years, I think, into a marketing degree, and I kind of realized that I didn't really want to go into the corporate grad schemes that a lot of my fellow pupils were wanting to go into. and I thought, I like books. Books are going to need marketed as well. So I started looking into it, and I came across the Society of Young Publishers, and I went from there.
Thank you very much, Ceris. And Leah, what about you?
Hello, everyone. So I'm the art and production director at Floris Books. And just to give you a little bit of background about Floris, we're based in Edinburgh, and we're quite a small independent company. There's about 16 members of staff working there at the minute. And myself and my team are responsible for making our books look like they do. So that's everything from designing the covers to making sure that our printers print the books on the right paper stock. So in terms of how I found out about publishing, I was in my final year of my illustration undergrad, and I was making a lot of artists' books, and I got really interested about the actual physical making of books. And similar to Kirstin, I was frantically searching what to do next when I left uni, and found a postgraduate publishing degree that I decided I want to go on. So I found that through online research. And also I was a big fan of Devil Wears Prada. So I was like, they make magazines, so people must make books as well.
Thank you. I actually watched that film for a laugh recently and enjoyed it on a second watch many years after it first came out. So thank you, Leah. And Kay.
So hi, I'm the assistant publisher at Sandstone Press, working with Ceris. We've been going since 2002. We're based in the Highlands, and we publish 30 books a year, fiction, non-fiction, all for adults. As assistant publisher, I have sort of a few different hats, but today I'll be talking about editorial first and foremost. I actually became aware that I could work in publishing because of the existence of Sandstone. I had done my first degree and gone out abroad to teach English, come back with like no idea where I wanted to go next. And there was been a big bookworm, and my parents told me, I'm from the Highlands originally, I was staying with them. They told me that there was a reading happening in our local kind of heritage centre, and I went down, and it was Bob and Moira, and they were, I think this would have been 2010, and they were doing a reading and talking about it. And it was the first time that I had thought really, not just vaguely where do books come from, but that publishing was something real and alive and not confined to London. And it took me a few years to sort of make a decision that it was definitely where I wanted to go. But that was really kind of the dawning of the awareness for me that, that it was something that you could do and you didn't have to change your whole life to get into it.
Great, thank you. And those are all elements that I'm sure we'll kind of unpick a little bit more in the discussion, publishing not all being London-based. Certainly there's a big industry here in Scotland, which we'll hear more from our panel about shortly too. And nice to hear different routes into the industry too, with different skill sets as well. So just to follow on then from that question, where we've had a bit of an insight into some of your role, but to get more into details then, could we maybe get some insight into what your role would involve on more of a day-to-day basis? And Kirstin, we'll come to you.
Absolutely. Very unhelpfully, I'm going to say there is no day-to-day when it comes to my specific role, kind of being across two departments, but focusing on rights especially. I think that there is no kind of cycle really that it adheres to. Rights, I think, should kind of clarify that most people think of it as kind of translating into other languages around the world, but it also involves audio rights and extract rights, anthology rights, serial rights, basically any kind of exploiting of the author's intellectual property in any kind of way that we can to secure further income for them and further spread of the book or the story to kind of all regions that we can. So there's so many different things going into that kind of process. And permissions is also something that falls under rights, which sits slightly alongside it, but also separately. So it can be anything from having pitch meetings with international publishers to kind of crafting emails to literary scouts, to negotiating contracts, invoicing and chasing invoices, and trying to deal with tax forms for multiple different countries. There's lots and lots of different things that go into the kind of day-to-day of handling rights, and it's all kind of very much at very different processes along the way as well. So it's a big juggling act.
It sounds it, gosh, but also quite exciting too. Leah, what about you?
So my team, like I said, manages design and production, which is kind of unusual for bigger publishers, but quite common in smaller publishers. So I'll give a little bit of an insight into what my team will do in both those areas. So on design, day to day, we would do things like designing covers and typography for covers. We would find, commission, and work with and guide illustrators through the picture book making process, because Floris published picture books as well as adult nonfiction. There's typesetting as well, so making the pages of the book look like they do, and a lot of scheduling. Even though we're supposed to be creatives, we still need to make sure that our covers are ready on time, so a lot of organizational stuff as well. And on this production side, it's more to do with writing print specifications in order to communicate to the printer how we want the book printed. There's collecting quotes from multiple printers to make sure that we get the best price. We need to make sure that our books are delivered to the warehouses in time so they can be shared with bookshops in time for the pub dates, the publishing dates, and supporting the editorial department as well in their scheduling, because we need to make sure that all of the stuff that happens before the book gets made into a physical thing is on time as well. So yeah, organization on both sides, but quite different roles.
Thank you, that's useful to hear. And already what's coming through from the two panelists so far is just that collaborative ethos that's at the heart of every publishing house. You may have these different functions which each of our panelists are representing today, but really it's a book is produced by many hands, by many departments, many functions, and we're hearing about that a little bit already. So Ceris, what about Sandstone?
Similar to Kirstin and Leah, I do multiple things, and there isn't really that kind of day-to-day structured approach that you might get potentially in some of the bigger houses, because we are quite a small indie. So I handle our socials. That's happening every single day. So that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even LinkedIn and Pinterest and things like that as well. I do things like graphics for ads and copy for ads. I handle our newsletter, that sort of thing. But then there's also the PR side, which is pitching for reviews, pitching for interviews and features and things like that, so that our authors are being seen in the mainstream media as well. And it's all very different, and it's all lots of fun.
Great, thank you. And Kay?
Like everyone else has said, I'm going to say there isn't really a day-to-day routine, and that's part of why I love my job so much. On the editorial side, there's all the things that you would expect an editor to do. They'll be reading manuscripts, marking them up for authors, working with the authors to polish the manuscripts. That can, it goes back and forth, and it can take any amount of time, depending on how much work there is to do and how responsive the author is. And yeah, it's a lot of it is keeping to deadlines. Like Leah was saying, it's about making sure that when your publication is happening, so you have to make sure that the editing is working to a deadline, so you can have it proofread, so it can go to typesetting on time. The other things that I do, I contact like other authors for quotes supporting the books, for example. This is a great book on the front cover, that kind of thing. And I check the files at the various points as well to sort of to make sure that everything's coded well and that there aren't going to be any errors introduced later on. That's possibly more of a production job, but there's sort of a fine line between some of these things, I think. And also I read the submissions, and I sit on the acquisitions panel. So there's quite a few different things to do. I think what possibly isn't obvious, maybe this is just how we work at Sandstone, but the editor is very much the project manager for the book. So making sure that all the deadlines are hit and everything flows through. So there's a lot of, Bob calls me a professional nag, and I'll take it.
Thank you, Kay. Yeah, I think certainly from all of our panelists there, it's clear that administrative duties are a substantial part of any role in publishing. So, if you're in the audience now and thinking, about skills and things, administrative skills are really important, as we've heard from Kay there and the others, project management skills too. And you don't need to have had those in a publishing role to still be relevant. It's a skill that is certainly needed in the industry for all of these different functions. Okay, so I'd like to move on then to ask a little bit more about your particular roles, and in terms of skills, if you had to kind of say what were the skill sets needed to do your roles effectively, what would those be, please? And Kirstin, we'll start with you, please.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, as you've said, what we can kind of see already of hearing from all of us is that organisation is definitely a really key skill, particularly for rights, but for everything. And attention to detail. I need to keep track of where I have sent out manuscripts, who's looking at them at the moment. If anyone comes back and makes offers, I need to be able to follow up quickly and efficiently to make sure that there's no other authors forthcoming from the same territory. Going through contracts and things like that, your attention to detail is so important to make sure you're catching everything in these contracts that are going to be legally binding agreements. And I would say, I often get asked about working in rights, whether you need to have another language. I personally don't. English is usually the business language that's used for kind of all interactions. But if you do have another language, then it's absolutely a kind of an advantage, particularly obviously if you're going to be working with publishers from that territory. So it's something that I would say can be advantageous, but isn't necessary to be working in rights.
Yeah, that's helpful to hear. Thanks, Kirstin. Okay, we'll come to Ceris next on this one.
Copywriting is really useful. So, being used to writing for different audiences and for different platforms as well, because of so much of what I do is online now. And also, you don't need to be a brilliant designer, but having an understanding of Photoshop and InDesign. I mean, I use both of those every single day. And I pretty much taught myself. I just got one of those online free trials for a week over the summer holidays before I started working in publishing, and it's been so useful. The other thing that's kind of more of a soft skill, I suppose, is thinking ahead, because you do have to be thinking about campaigns for books that aren't even going to be out for 6 months, and knowing what you're going to do with it and how you're going to make noise around publication, even though it's not a real thing yet. It hasn't come back from the printer. You possibly haven't even had a chance to read it yet. But you need to be able to tell people why they're going to love it, and make sure that when it is a physical book, people are ready to run out and buy it.
Great, thank you. And Leah?
Yeah, so in terms of the two different areas of design and production, there are some specific skills. So I would say that for design, you'd ideally have a talent for composition and the ability to be a creative thinker. I don't think that's just necessary in design, I should say. In all of these roles, I would say you need to be able to think creatively. Big one's teamwork and communication. As we've already heard from the other panelists, publishing is a massively collaborative process. So you need to be able to work well with each other's in-house. And then also we would manage freelancers as well, like artists and illustrators. So being able to work with them and communicate well is important. And then also, as Ceris was saying, the Adobe Creative Suite. So ideally you would have skills in Photoshop and InDesign. And I self-taught as well. So there are a lot of great resources out there. It's possible to teach yourself. And in terms of production, organizational skills already mentioned, head for numbers as well, because in Floris anyway, you would be working with a lot of printers, getting quotes in and putting them all into Excel spreadsheet. You got to get really comfortable in Excel. Teamwork and communication again, and also really exceptional eye for detail, because if you ask the printer to do something that you didn't agree in-house or whatever, if something goes wrong on the specifications, then you're not going to get the book that you needed to get printed. So detail's key.
Definitely. Thank you, Leah. And Kay?
I was smiling when you mentioned Excel there, because I use it every day. It's how I manage virtually everything. We log the submissions on a spreadsheet, and I put all the scheduled dates on the spreadsheets. So yeah, Excel is a great tool, and one that I would absolutely recommend anybody to get comfortable with, because it really does make my life so much easier. I think all the panelists have covered most of the same things that I would say. You need to have attention to detail in editorial, obviously, You need to be able to spell, and you need to have good time management, because I won't be like editing one book for 3-4 months and then moving on to the next. I'll have maybe 3 or 4 books in various stages of development and have to go back and forward between them all and keep them all on schedule. So that's quite important too. So your multitasking, organization. The one that I don't know if it's certainly not something that I anticipated before I started the job is, but you've got to have really strong negotiation skills and relationship building skills. You know, one of the first things I have to do as an editor, particularly if I'm doing structural editing or there's a book that needs quite a bit of development, I have to build that relationship with the author so that they trust me to make changes to something that they've poured their heart and soul into for maybe years. So I have to be able to, you know, to build that relationship, to sort of and to negotiate with them. So I understand where you're coming from, but this is what I'm seeing as the reader, and you know, so there's a lot of give and take, and yeah, it's collaborative all over the way. But I think one of the, certainly in my role, the most important is that author relationship, and so that's absolutely critical to develop it. And that did come as a bit of a shock to me, because I didn't go into books thinking I was going to become a people person, but it's been great. And actually working with the authors is one of the best parts of the job, even when they wind you up. So yeah, negotiation, organization, time management.
Great, thank you. Thanks to you all for that. It's notable to me, just there are some specific skills for each of your particular roles, but a lot of them are those broader communication skills, product management skills, software skills that would be fitting for so many different roles as well. So I think that's really helpful to hear. And also just that blend of creativity and business that's needed. You know, I think sometimes there's a bit of a misconception about the publishing industry. It's officially a creative industry, but you know, most publishers at the end of the day, they are actually businesses and do need to make money to survive. So it's often that kind of balancing act, isn't it, between the commerce and the kind of culture of it too. So yeah, that was useful to hear about. We've had a couple of questions in from the audience, which is great. As I mentioned before, I'll come back to those shortly, but please do keep them coming in. Really good questions so far. So what strikes me about the panel today, and this is representative of Scottish publishing more broadly, is that all 4 of you work for what we would call an independent publisher in Scotland. Now, independent really just means a smaller publisher that is quite literally independent. They're not financially owned or dependent on anyone else other than themselves. So that's how most of the industry is in Scotland, not all, but most. So I wondered if I could hear a little bit from each of you about, you know, your own views of the Scottish publishing industry. And if you wanted to tailor that to your particular role, that's fine, or you can speak more broadly. I don't mind at all. So Kay, we're actually going to come to you this time.
I don't have an answer ready for this one yet. I think that as an independent publisher, particularly where Sandstone's based in the Highlands, we've got quite a different perspective on things, you know, than the larger corporate publishers. I mean, we publish 30 books a year. That's not many in the grand scheme of things. So every book that we publish, somebody, ideally, or the whole team, has to really believe in. We have to want to publish it. We have to know why we're publishing it. And, you know, it's very personal for us. I think some of our authors have previously been with larger, one of the big 5 publishers. It's the big 4 now, isn't it? But they talk about how they get a lot more sort of support and personal attention from us, and how they really appreciate feeling like part of a group. And you see that on social media too. All of the Sandstone authors, they maybe not even met themselves, but they feel like they're part of something with us, and that's wonderful to see. So I think that being independent and being Scottish and international, which is how we like to see ourselves, means that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to take risks. Celestial Bodies is an obvious example. It was a risk for us to take on a literary Arabic translation. It was not something we'd done before at all. And you know, a lot of bigger publishers must have seen it beforehand and decided not to go for it, and we had wonderful success with it. So yeah, it gives you a different point of view, and it allows you to take risks and do things a little bit differently, and really to work on projects that you're very passionate about, and it's just terrific. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Leah, do you have anything to add to this?
I absolutely echo everything that Kay was saying. It does feel more personal. Everyone in the company sees the book close up, and most of the people in the company will touch a book at some point throughout its making. So yeah, there's that, but there's also, I feel like the publishers in Scotland, because they're all quite small, they need to know their niches really well, and they all specialize in different niches, and therefore the competition between houses isn't as fraught as it may be potentially in bigger corporate publishers, maybe down south. So we can give each other that support that we otherwise might not be able to if we were direct competitors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And actually, Leah, just while you were having your chat there, we've had a question in from the audience just for you. So I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you. So thanks very much for the question. And the audience member says, thanks for a great discussion. For Leah, how important is a creative degree if you want to work in design?
I'd say it's not. The biggest benefit, I think, of having a creative degree is having those years of just being able to focus on your craft and being given constant prompts and feedback on your work from your tutors. If you're determined enough, you can do that on your own, alongside a job, if you're one to kind of teach yourself. So I wouldn't say that it's absolutely necessary. I would want to see a portfolio from someone applying for a design job, but that doesn't need to be born out of a creative degree at all.
Great, thank you. And we've got some more audience questions coming in, which is great. Thank you, everybody. Keris, what about you in the Scottish sector?
Kind of following on from what Leah was saying, it's a really friendly and supportive bit of the industry. I mean, Kirstin was my mentor through the Society of Young Publishers when I was a wee undergrad. So there's, you know, you have all these relationships with other people who you can pick up the phone to and ask questions when you're not sure about things. And maybe that does partly come from that lack of competition because we have different niches, but it's also just a really lovely thing. I did intern at a big publisher, HarperCollins, when I was just coming out of my undergrad, and I had a really good experience there as well. But it is very different to independent publishing. Partly just there's lots more people, but also departments do specific things rather than all at once, if that makes sense. So there was a whole royalties department, which, you know, is mind-boggling to indie presses. And I mean, there were different departments within rights. So I worked with the business development team. And that's so specific, and to have that kind of focus, it results in some very different and interesting kinds of work. But what I do love about my job is that it's so many different things, and it never gets boring because you're doing lots of different things. I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. Thank you, Keris. And I think it's worth saying for the potential, you know, job seekers that are in the audience today, you know, it's maybe worth having a bit of a think about what kind of work environment does suit you best, because as we're hearing from today at an independent press, because it's smaller, you are much more involved in all that interdepartmental, well, everything from the decision making to the actual kind of getting it all going. And you are always going to be juggling multiple projects and keeping all those plates spinning at the one time. Whereas, you know, in a conglomerate or a larger publisher, these roles will likely be more defined. It will still be busy, of course, and lots of multitasking, but maybe in a slightly different way, as we've heard from Keris there as well. And Kirstin, what about you?
I mean, absolutely. As you've just said, Jill, I mean, that's exactly what I kind of was thinking about when I was starting out on my publishing journey. I knew that I wanted to work at a small publisher because I wanted that kind of that ability to oversee kind of what was happening with all of the different departments and to kind of follow a book through its entire journey through the process. I just found it so fascinating. And it's lovely to be able to kind of follow it as it goes through and kind of see how it changes, see how it adapts. And I think, you know, it also speaks to we've already kind of mentioned multiple times, but the teamwork aspect of publishing, I find it a lot more useful to be part of a smaller team, because you have so much more knowledge that can help inform what you're doing, but also you can then in turn help your colleagues around you in different departments, as well as, you know, the things that you're working on together. You can help each other and kind of fine tune specific things you're working on a little bit more, because you have that kind of further knowledge, the kind of overview of what has happened with this book and everything going on around it. I really enjoy that. And to speak to specifically the kind of Scottish aspect, we've already mentioned it, but I do think it's a really kind of friendly and collaborative atmosphere among the publishers here. Again, I think definitely because of that kind of lack of a huge amount of competition, we definitely cheer each other on, we celebrate each other's successes, and you know that you can always kind of, there's always someone that you can turn to kind of ask a question or get some feedback, so it's obviously a fantastic kind of atmosphere to be part of.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Really nice and very true too. And Publishing Scotland, who's one of the host partners of the series of events, they're very much at the heart of all of that as well, being the trade body too. So yeah. Okay, so we've got some more audience questions in. Thank you so much. Really good ones there, which we will come to really quite soon, in fact. I wanted to ask you all, this might be hard, but what's the one standout moment in your publishing career so far, and why? So, Kay, we're coming to you.
When Celestial Bodies won the Man Booker International, just by miles. I mentioned, as a book I mentioned before, it's by an Arab author, a woman from Oman called Joka Al-Harti. And initially, you know, the book was supported by the Edinburgh International Book Festival, but it hadn't achieve the kind of success that we'd hoped for initially. And then when it was longlisted, it was like, oh great, you know, we're going to get some more attention for it now. And then we had the shortlist and really started to believe that it was possible it was going to win. And it felt very personal to me, because I was the first person at the company who'd read it. I'd really championed it and then done the English language edit on it. And so yeah, just when it won, it was just this overwhelming joy of, you know, there's other people are seeing in this book what I saw in this book, and yeah, one of the best professional nights of my life. Absolutely.
I can imagine. It was so exciting to see that win for Sandstone, and you being such a central role part in that too. Fantastic. Leah, what about you?
Slightly oddly, I'm going to go back to when it all began. When I was studying publishing, I really enjoyed the course. I studied a one-year course in a Master's in Publishing at Edinburgh Napier University, which I believe all of our panelists have done at one point or another. Yeah. So the women I met on that course are still close friends today, and through them I've got insight into different areas of the industry. So some have gone off to work in magazines, some have worked in educational publishing, children's publishing. So that's been really wonderful to see them flourish and become leaders in their own areas of industry, but then also having that support as I've progressed through my career, and having people that kind of understand the context of what you're working in when you're going through issues in your work or whatever, and being able to really understand the successes that they're going through. So when Kay says that, you know, she's won the Man Booker International with one of her books, you're like, I get that, I get how big a deal that is. So yeah, I think that back where it all began was a highlight, I guess.
Oh, that's nice to hear. And Kirstin?
I'm going to keep mine specifically rights for the purpose of this talk as well. But I think the thing for me, and it's probably slightly cheating, but is that you know, I kind of fell into rights when I started at Barrington Stoke. It wasn't something that I had sought out, but it just kind of landed on my desk. And in the time that I've been with the company, I like to think that I've grown it quite substantially from where it was when I got handed it. So kind of that ability that I've had, that influence that I've had in kind of building the rights at Barrington Stoke to something that's kind of twice, 3 times, sometimes 4 times, you know, annual turnover of what it was previously. I'm really proud of that, and I also think that it's an important part because, you know, obviously that's extra income for the company, but it's also more extra income for the authors, and, you know, just doing our best by them and kind of getting their story as far and as wide as we possibly can.
Great, thank you. And Ceris?
I struggled with this one a little bit because when you've got a whole campaign that spans marketing and publicity, it's not a single moment, unless it, wins a big prize like Celestial Bodies did, which was obviously fantastic and so exciting. But it's more of a kind of lots of different aspects that you've worked really hard to bring together, all kind of coinciding. But yeah, kind of going back to the beginning of my career, the first time that I had an author interview in the Times, that was just so exciting, and I still remember that. It was The Electric Woman by Tessa Fontaine, and they sent a photographer out to watch her do fire eating and things, and
Wow.
it was just a really, really cool thing to have been part of. And yeah, every time that there's something that's, a big piece of national media like that, that's kind of what really gets me excited.
Yes, definitely. And I've been there too with pitching to the media, and it's such a buzz when something you've worked on appears in, in something tangible in the press, definitely. Great. So just to pick up on what one of the threads in that discussion there was about the mention of publishing courses. So I thought I would just kind of explain that a little bit more. So all of our panel have done the Masters in Publishing at Edinburgh Napier University, as we've heard. And I also teach on Scotland's only other one, which there's only the two in Scotland, which is the MLit in Publishing Studies at Stirling University as well. So these courses, they have different types of modules, but essentially they'll introduce you to, the skill sets and the roles that that publishing will require, and they're all very up to date in terms of goings on in the industry, and have usually staff that have taught, staff that teach on the courses that have worked in the industries themselves. So yeah, I just thought to mention that for context, so that you can understand what these mentions of publishing courses have been. All right, so after this last question to the panel from me, I'm going to move on to the questions. So please do keep them coming in from the audience. But just to wrap up from me then, I would like to ask you all, what advice would you give to our audience today who are hoping to gain employment in the industry? And in terms of some resources for those interested, where would you recommend that they look? And we'll come to Kay for that to begin.
I think one of the best things you can do if you're wanting to get into the industry is join the Society of Young Publishers, because there'll be a strong network there of people who are already in the industry, who probably only been in the industry for a couple of years, so they remember exactly what it was like to just be getting their first kind of taste of where they might go. So, and I made some great friends there, and they had lots of interesting events, and that gave me kind of some very realistic ideas of what I could expect and what I should be applying myself to. I think, yeah, I would recommend the SYP. Can't recommend it highly enough. In terms of advice, I think for me, I thought about making my own opportunities, because I mentioned before that Sandstone Press was how I became aware that you could even work in publishing in Scotland. And I knew about the company. It was still quite small, but there were sort of rumblings that they might be looking to expand soon. So pretty much as soon as I heard that, I was studying the degree at Napier at the time, I asked if I could visit them for an internship. And it was relatively easy for me to do that because I had family in the area. So then when they were taking on another position, which I think was a year down the line, by which time I'd had experience with another company, I knew them, and that helps if you go and you make a good impression. So yeah, keep your ear to the ground, find opportunities where they might not otherwise be, and I think that really helps.
Great advice there, thank you, Kay. Leah, we'll come to you.
Yeah, so in terms of advice, I would say I'm going to be realistic with my answer. I'm keen for the audience to go into the industry if that's what they want to do, with their eyes and their minds open. It's a difficult industry to get a job in. there's a lot of competition for roles, and the roles aren't particularly well paid. You've heard about the amount of work that goes into making a book, and then we sell them for only a couple of pounds at the end of the process. So there isn't a massive amount of money in the industry that then makes its way to salaries. So because then people do it for the love and not so much the money, there can be risk of burnout. So I would just want you to go into that, be mindful of your boundaries, so you can judge what's right for you in terms of your salary, and if you're willing to do unpaid overtime and that kind of thing. That is what my advice would be. In terms of resources, bookcareers.com is a great website run by Suzanne Collier that has loads of information on finding a role in the industry. It's based in the UK, but I think a lot of what she posts should be relevant overseas as well. And I know that last week, Pan Macmillan, a big publisher down in London, teamed up with the Books Agency and a company called Eric to deliver a free online event that demystified publishing. And I can't find any links to the recorded events yet, but there are loads of helpful resources on the Eric website. Meet-eric.com, get a job in publishing. So there might be some useful stuff there.
Great, thank you, Leah. And Ceris?
I'd say think about your transferable skills. Before I came into publishing, I'd worked as a copywriter, and obviously that's really useful, but it also looks good on your CV. And I think another thing that was useful coming into the industry was I'd worked on phones, like just picking up the phones in a kind of call center environment, and being able to phone people to pitch things is useful. And seeing things like that maybe don't seem like necessarily the most relevant kinds of job experience, that kind of thing, if you don't have an internship to lean back on, I guess, is really, really useful. And I'd echo everything that Kay and Leah have said as well.
Great, thank you. And Kirstin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our panelists have already kind of covered everything that I would say as well. I think that if I'm going to wave my rights flag for a moment, I would say consider rights. I think when people think about publishing, they maybe think about editorial or marketing as kind of the first kind of obvious things. But rights, I think, is such a great starting point for a lot of people. And I think the thing about working in rights is that it really nicely kind of, I like to think that it straddles editorial and marketing in a really nice way. So I know people that have started in rights and gone on to jobs in other departments. So I think it can be a really good way to get a good oversight of a company, but also publishing in general. So that would be kind of my moment for rights. And I think in terms of resources, I think it's such a chatty industry that I think being involved or getting involved in conversation on social media or just following the conversation, there's so many things that you can kind of just pick up from what the people or the companies are talking about. So if you're on Twitter, which is probably, I would say, the majority of like where publishing chat happens, follow the companies, but also try and follow some of the kind of key people. Have a look at what's happening in the bookseller or book brunch, in the kind of daily news. There's also a couple of really good blogs, I would say, that one of which is by a former SYP UK chair. Her name is Ayn, and she runs a kind of YouTube channel that is all about how to help you get into publishing. Some really fantastic advice. And I will hopefully be able to pass that YouTube link on at some point, but it's a really, really fantastic video. It's offering lots and lots of different advice about cover letters, CVs, and kind of helping demystify all the rules, things that we've been talking about today as well.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of you for those really comprehensive answers with some really great tips for the audience to action after the session. So thank you. Okay, so I'm pleased to turn to the audience Q&A now, and I'll just go through in the order that they've come in. And in terms of the panel, I don't think I'll go round each of you for them. So if you could maybe just indicate with your hand if you want to come in on one, and I'll say to you to come in, just so we don't have too many folk speaking at once. Okay, so the first one is, what would the panel suggest is useful to know on progressing your career from entry level? Leah.
Thanks. I want to make a point about in terms of publishing houses, as you progress into a more senior role, that tends to come with management or leadership responsibilities. And I would say figure out if you want to be a manager or not, because it's not for everyone. And it is a whole other skill set in itself, which can move you further away from your craft. And if that's not what you're after, if you're not really that level of a people person, then maybe consider if it's something that you do want to go into. That is an issue, though. I don't quite know how one would grow in seniority in publishing without also taking on management responsibilities, but I don't know if any of the other panelists have a sense of how that could happen.
Kirstin and then Kay.
Thanks. I was just going to absolutely follow up what Leah said. I think that's really good advice. But I also think that in terms of moving on, I think that a good thing, I think, is moving companies can also help. You know, if once you've got your kind of foot in the door, it can be really good to kind of get, you know, a couple of years under your belt there, and then maybe start thinking if, you know, progression is something you're really, really keen on. Think about moving around to different industries, potentially different companies, and potentially different departments, to kind of really help build your skill set, and also just get a kind of view of how different companies work, because I would say that every publishing house is different. There's not a kind of really strict way of this is how it's done. So gaining all that kind of extra experience can really help you progress quite quickly, I would say.
Thank you. And Kay?
I was really going to echo what Leah said, that because of the structure, particularly of a lot of the smaller companies, as you progress, you can find yourself using fewer of your technical skills and more of your soft skills. I don't know if there's necessarily a way around that, but if you want to become like a technical expert in something, then focus on that and maybe look at opportunities related, but not necessarily. Think a little bit differently. I think there's always a way to sort of take a sideways step, or to go freelance to focus on exactly what you want to do. There's many ways to go about getting where you want to be.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with that. Great. Thank you for the insight there from the panel. Okay, our next question for whoever wants to come in is, and this is a good one, any tips on networking if you're a bit anxious about it, which, let's face it, most people probably are. Ceris and then Kay.
I mean, it seems like a strange thing to have somebody who is quite socially anxious in marketing and publicity, but that's me. And I don't think that's actually as unusual as you would expect it to be from the personas that people put on. So remembering that other people are probably feeling like that as well helps. But honestly, the thing that I find most useful is getting involved with things that you can do rather than, I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but I got involved with the SYP at committee level, and that helped me meet people because we actually had something to do, something to focus on, a project to work on. And you get to know people in a different way, and it also allows people to see where your skills are and that you're a person that can be relied on, which is definitely a useful thing to have kind of in the long run.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Kay?
Yeah, I'd echo what Kara said. If you can get like a temp job as a bookseller, or a volunteer position or something like that, where you're getting to meet people in the industry, and you're working on something together, it can feel much more natural than going to a networking event. I have a little kind of strategy to meet people when I'm networking and I feel anxious. I don't hide that I feel anxious. I'll literally go up to the person who's standing by the wall and say, please talk to me, I don't know anyone. And it always makes them laugh, and it makes them feel good because, you know, you've approached somebody. So, I mean, that's a big part of my personality. I probably don't come across very shy, but I can feel very shy. And so I'll make a joke of it, and that works for me, and it helps to break the tension. So, yeah, I think it helps to know how you're going to handle that situation. If you know that you're going to feel uncomfortable, just sort of decide, this is what I will do if I get to this point. It helps me, but obviously people are different. So
I think that's a good tip, Kay, definitely, and I think it is something that a lot of people do feel very nervous about. So, and just as we've heard, it's worth remembering that, you'll not be the only person feeling like that, despite the image that's maybe projected by some of the other attendees. And I would also just come in following on from what Kirstin said a little bit about social media and being a kind of networking opportunity. Especially in the pandemic, but even before that, a lot of networking and publishing does go on in Twitter. So, like we've heard, follow key people, get involved in industry discussions. People generally are nice on social media and in real life. So, just kind of suss out the lie of the land and get involved even digitally to sort of help you get going a little bit. And then if you've swatted up a bit on Twitter and things, when you actually get into industry events, you've got stuff that you can talk about to your also slightly anxious fellow attendees. So just don't rule out digital is what I would say too. Okay, so where are we now in the questions? So we have one here. So really appreciate this insightful discussion. Thank you very much. I was wondering if you have any advice on finding and landing work experience, internships, or entry-level jobs in the industry. Ceris?
I got my first internship when I just finished my undergrad through the SYP jobs board. So keeping an eye there, keeping an eye on Twitter again, super useful resource. And the other place is Publishing Scotland's website. Their jobs and opportunities list all of the paid internships and things that are going in the Scottish trade. So yeah, those are probably my key pieces of advice.
Great. Yeah, and I would add to that too, Creative Scotland, they have an opportunities listing board too, and we'll have kind of, not necessarily all publishing, of course, but certainly related creative industries types of listings. And we have heard how a lot of this is quite transferable skills. So I would say, have a look and see what's out there, maybe in a kind of parallel industry as well, and see what you could do in order to bring it together, really. Great. Kirstin?
I would also just quickly add, just make sure, before you approach a publisher, if you are going to ask about that, what they say on their website about work placements or internships, because some publishers make it very clear that they don't. Some publishers make it very clear what their kind of parameters are. So just make sure that if you are approaching anyone, you're doing it kind of within what they've already said is their kind of their parameters.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. Just make sure before you embark on any of this, just read the websites and see what they say, definitely. Okay, so thank you for these questions so far. We have another one, which is it necessary to have a Bookstagram with a large following or a blog about books to stand out in the application process? I'm going to come to Ceris on this one.
I mean, showing that you understand what's going on online is definitely not a bad thing, but I don't think we would rule somebody out because they weren't, because they didn't have a big following. What I would say is you should be, even if you're not particularly active on these platforms, you should be aware of what's going on and how they're useful, particularly for a role in marketing. That probably does depend on what department you're looking to go into. But for mine, you need to understand what's going on, even if you don't have that massive following.
Yeah, I teach marketing, and I would agree with that. I personally don't think it's necessarily about the number of followers. I'd say it's more about the quality of your content. If you're producing content regularly on your Twitter or on another social media platform that's engaging and is getting some good engagement, despite maybe not having thousands of followers, but you can demonstrate that you've got an audience understanding and kind of what content producing is and things. I'd say that's more important, the kind of quality. Than quantity, quite literally. Anyone else wanting to come in on this, Leah?
Yeah, I just want to speak up for the people that aren't massive fans of social media. And I would say from a design or editorial background, I'm going to speak for editorial here. I hope my colleagues and Floris are okay with that. I don't think that would be important. An interview stage, we would set some tasks. So for our design role, we would ask someone to design a cover that we would give them a brief for, and then they would share that with us when they come into the interview. It's about their talent and their potential, and I don't even look at their social media because if they're not particularly into that, or if they're a private kind of person, I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's really much more for those marketing, communications, publicity roles that things like social media and what we've answered in terms of the most recent question, that becomes much more central. But for the other roles, yeah, I agree, it's not nearly so key. Okay, thank you. I'm keen to get through the remaining questions because we've only got 5 minutes left. So I'll move on to the next one, which also says, thank you for the insightful discussion, really enjoying it. Thank you for letting us know that. I was wondering how I can make connections in the publishing industry to gain advice and relationships. Who'd like to come in on this one? Leah, and then Kirstin.
Mentoring. The Society of Young Publishers has an excellent mentorship scheme that pairs members of SYP with experienced publishers in the industry. That's a great relationship to be able to set up. You can find out about the industry from them, or even just kind of work through any issues that you're having, and getting good advice and feedback on your CV and that kind of thing. And then that's useful, especially if you end up at a networking event and that mentor is there, then you have at least one person you can talk to. So yeah, mentoring. But there are other mentoring schemes as well. I would say for designers, female designers, Kerning the Gap offers a mentorship scheme that is really positive, and Creative Edinburgh as well. So have a look for mentorships.
Great, thank you. Kirstin?
Yep, absolutely. Leah's just stolen my answer. Mentor schemes, I think, are so invaluable and a really, really great way for you to figure out what it is that you want to do, or that, if publishing definitely is for you. And I would just echo what she said there about the kind of the SIP and Creative Edinburgh. And if you're interested in going into children's books, then Children's Books North also have a really great mentorship scheme now as well. So there's lots and lots of different organisations out there, I think, that you could kind of be in touch with to kind of figure out your way in.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've just had another few questions. So yeah, apologies, I'd missed this one in the scrolling down in the chat earlier. So this question, I'm wondering about advice for someone mid-career interested in pivoting into publishing, and they've previously worked in journalism as an editor. Okay.
Nearly. So I had an established administration career. I'd been working in academic administration for 6 years when I decided that I'd had quite enough of that and wanted to do something different, and decided to do the way that I decided to do it was to do the publishing masters at Napier. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from, wanting to sort of change things, and it was a little bit frightening to me because I already had, responsibilities and a mortgage and, all those kinds of things. And it was a big decision to me. So first of all, if you're thinking seriously about how to do it, good for you. We all talked about the transferable skills that you'll have that you can bring to it. And there is no substitute for experience, but if you have a lot of experience in other things, then, think about what experience you might lack. It's still probably worth joining something like the Society of Young Publishers, because young in that context means new to the industry. It doesn't mean that you have to be a teenager or anything like that. So a lot of the same advice applies, but yeah, the odds are that you will have to start lower than you might like to get that kind of breadth of experience. But if you've got a lot of skills, then you'll usually get the chance to show really quickly what you can do and go from there. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. And certainly, like journalism and editorial skills, to me, they sound very transferable in terms of bringing into the publishing industry specifically. Okay, I can't believe it. We've only got 1 minute left. So one question's just come in that I'll just answer. It says, if you join SYP, how can you be involved to become an active member and make connections? The SYP is open for membership all year round. It's just all on their website. You've heard about the Scotland branch here, but there's branches all throughout the UK if that's where you're based. And yeah, you just join, and obviously now most of the current events are all online, but as we've said, it's still a great way to meet people, and you can, chat with folk digitally through that, and then once the world calms down and face-to-face is possible, then you've already kind of met people to take forward face-to-face as well. Anything to add from the panel on that? No?
I would just quickly say that if you're interested in kind of doing what Ceris mentioned previously about getting involved in a kind of really hands-on way, all the various branches open for applications to join their committee on a yearly basis, I think it is. So it would just be to keep an eye out on your regional branch, wherever that is, when those open, and pitch.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I'm going to have to wrap up there. There was one question we didn't get to, apologies for that. But thank you to all the audience for your fantastic questions and for joining us today. Thank you to our wonderful panel, and thank you to everyone involved in hosting the session as well. Just as a reminder, please don't forget to visit bookshop.org if you'd like to buy any of the books featured this weekend, and you can also sign up for Scottish Books Long Weekend as well. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. We look forward to seeing your reactions on social media if that's your bag, but no worries if it's not. Yeah, and thank you everybody very much.